Good afternoon, everybody. This is Sheila Vitale. Thank you for joining us with Ann Carlson and Cassie Paulsgrove as we talk about credit flexibility. I have, right now, you are all muted, but you can unmute yourself. So during this conversation, if you're going to speak on the call, if Cassie and Ann, as they get started on this program, if they need to hear from you, please unmute yourself when you ask a question or make a statement. Identify who you are, what school you're with, because that would also be helpful for me and the rest of my staff that's listening in on this. So unmute yourself when you have to ask the question. Then I just ask that you go ahead and mute yourself during other times so we're not all hearing all the noises in the background that we don't normally hear. So with that, I'm going to kick it off to Ann and Cassie.
That's great. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate the time to be on the call. My name is Cassie Paulsgrove, and I work in the Center for Teaching, Leading, and Learning, and I'm going to kick it to Ann to introduce herself in just a second. I work with our Career Connections team and our Success-Bound work and managing work-based learning options and how we can innovatively use credit flexibility for that. Ann?
I'm Ann Carlson. I'm a math consultant in the department, and I am in charge of credit flexibility for the department. And I also work with graduation curriculum requirements and assist with special education curriculum requirements also.
Awesome. And we kind of want to connect back with you our topic today and how it fits into our education strategic plan. So about a year ago, the department released our education strategic plan, and one of the major impetuses for that was that our jobs are rapidly changing in Ohio and across the nation and require different skill sets. So as we're thinking about preparing students for their futures, it's important for us as educators to be thinking about what we'll be graduating students to in the future. With that, another key piece of the plan is our one goal for education, which is to annually increase the percentage of high school graduates who within 1 year of graduation are doing one of four things: either enrolled and succeeding in a post-high school learning experience, which includes adult career technical education programs, an apprenticeship program, and or a 2 or 4 year degree, serving in a military branch, earning a living wage, or engaged in a meaningful self-sustaining vocation. So our topic today is really how can we leverage credit flexibility and work-based learning to help students get there in the most meaningful way possible. So we're going to start with an overview of credit flexibility for how it relates to middle school students and then high school students, kind of talk with you a little bit about the legal requirements for credit flexibility policies and plans, and then we're going to talk with you about how those things can translate into credit flex for work-based learning. So I'll kick it to Ann to give the overview.
Thank you. Credit flexibility is in Ohio Revised Code. That means that any student from the time they're in 7th grade through 12th grade may access a personalized method for earning graduation requirements or satisfying school grade level requirements. So 7th and 8th graders are now allowed to satisfy their regular everyday curriculum requirements that a district requires or a school requires by substituting another method of learning or within a topic that they're interested in, as well as the original access of credit flexibility, which was when a student came to the point where they were ready to learn high school level curriculum, they could earn credit for that high school curriculum as a 7th and 8th grader. Now all schools in Ohio, public schools in Ohio, including community schools, must have district policy or school policy that permits credit flexibility to be utilized and accessed by 7th and 8th graders, and then also through 9th through 12th graders. I'll open that now for some questions to see what questions you might have about that, because there I know are some people that didn't have the awareness that 7th and 8th grade was an opportunity. Any questions about that?
So if you have any questions, you have to manually unmute yourself and just let us know who it is with the question. Thank you.
Must not have any.
Okay, if you come up with any questions for my 7th and 8th grader, it looks like someone just unmuted themselves. If you want to ask the question, go right ahead. Okay.
Hi, this is Lori. My one question, Ann, would be how credit flexibility and the accelerated learning policy would differ for 7th and 8th graders that may be taking high school coursework throughout and not in maybe a standard traditional schedule.
Okay. First of all, for a student to use credit flexibility, they don't have to be accelerated by rule in the gifted exceptional children area. They can just have made it through showing a demonstration of learning that they're ready to learn high school content. And so those students could be put on a credit flex plan in order to access, say they're going to take an algebra or a math 1 or 2 course in middle school, or they're going to move on into high school level English, so that the coursework, whatever they're learning, and then demonstrating the expectations for that learning can then have credit earned that applies toward their graduation requirements. Did that help?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
And as an aside to that one, Anne, could you tell us, if you have students that are very fluent in another language, so if English might be the student's second language, or if they have parents who are at home speaking and writing in a different language, could they, if they're 7th and 8th graders, use that towards a high school credit?
Absolutely. There are methods in which students can be assessed in order to earn world language credit for their cultural language, their first language, or even a second language if they are bilingual and more than bilingual. Ryan Wertz, it's Ryan. His last name is Wertz, Wertz, is the best person in our department to talk to about those processes and the assessments in order to see what students are eligible for. Students cannot use work in their natural language to replace English credits, but they can use it to replace world language credits. So he would be a really good person to access. And the easiest way would be to give you an email address, which is ryan.wertz@education.ohio.gov.
Thank you, Anne.
Any other questions about 7th and 8th grade access to credit flexibility? I don't see any. Okay, so let's move on to high school. What's the whole point of credit flexibility? Well, credit flexibility is intended to assist students to be able to demonstrate learning in a way in which has meaning to them, has matches their learning styles, their passions, and is not saddled to, literally, a seat in a classroom for a certain number of times or hours. Credit flexibility doesn't care how the student learns. The point is, how does the student demonstrate, and how well do they demonstrate the learning expectations that are set aside in a credit flex plan. Credit flexibility, for those of you who have brick and mortar schools, doesn't mean that the classwork has to be done during the regular school day. It can be done during vacation time. It can be done after school hours, before school hours. It can be done during school hours. And the credits that are being earned in credit flexibility count toward the credits not only for graduation, but also for enrollment and attendance. So, and there are some nuances with that with community schools, but it still blends together. The point is that you need to have appropriately licensed for your licensure issues, for however you deal with licensure, people evaluating the demonstrated learning, but it doesn't have to be taught by a person who is licensed, because the student can actually teach themselves. So it isn't about how they learn or who they learn it from. It's the actual demonstration of the learning, and to the level that it needs to be learned, it's shown. The credit is not associated with a certain amount of time spent on the project that they're doing or the plan. So it's not a credit for a log of time spent on something. It's toward the value of the learning, toward the credits for graduation. And that's all up to the local school and or school district to determine that. It can be used as a mechanism in credit recovery by assessing what a student knows already in a specific course that they haven't done well in or they haven't completed, and working together with the student to outline what the student needs yet to learn and how they're going to demonstrate it, and the criteria by which they need to show that they're competent in that learning, and credit can be assigned to it. It can be any proportional amount of credit that one would ever offer credit for. A student could, yesterday I talked with a person about doing independent design opportunities, and there's no reason why a credit flex plan can't identify standards from multiple content areas, career tech areas, work skills, as well as content learning, and earn separate credit identified for each one of those areas as they demonstrate that learning.
So, Ann, here's a question. So we have one of our schools that is closely affiliated with a nearby college, and their students participate in the theater production.
Sure.
They are extras, or they participate in the plays and things like that.
Sure.
Could the school then use the students' participation in that theater production, whether it is stage crew, whether they are actually part of the production and being on the stage, they have a place in the play? Could they develop that into a credit flex for that student?
Absolutely. So what you would do is you would identify the standards from whatever areas that you believe, with the situation that they would be working with, that the student would be learning and demonstrating competency in, and you would look at what areas do those align in. Theater is usually an ELA course, so it could be earning credit toward English Language Arts graduation credit. It could also be that they're learning work skills, because they could be demonstrating how they see that role as a work position, and if there are identified work skills that go with it, it also could be written that way. There are any number of ways to outline standards that students are meeting and then assign credits along with. Once again, the most important part is, what are they expected to do and how are they going to be evaluated on what they're doing?
So the key is making sure that they have the plan written up with evaluations and some standards that they're going to look to evaluate.
Absolutely.
Whether it's a paper, whether it's a conversation with the professor or one of the teachers. Okay.
One of the things that we make sure people understand is how important it is to write the specifics down as to what the student is doing, what this is all about, who's responsible. It doesn't have to be nitpicky, but who has what kinds of responsibility in it? What are the criteria, especially that the student needs to meet? Because too many times students get in a situation where the adults that they work with in the end aren't the same adults that they started with, and people try to change things. And that's about the most unfair thing that we can do to kids, is change the rules in the middle of the road. A credit flexibility plan, once established, can be changed if all parties who signed it are willing to accept the changes.
And I think we have a question from someone.
Yes, I saw that. I don't know. It sounded like they started.
Okay. Do we have any questions out there from anybody regarding credit flexibility or something that you're thinking about doing and you want to see if that could fit into a credit flexibility plan? Or is there something that you may have done and you want to make sure that it fits within the guidelines? So if there's any of those questions, please pop in right now. Okay, then we're just going to go ahead and keep moving on.
Go ahead, Cassie.
If anyone is on, if you can mute, because we're hearing a lot of some noises, background noises. So if you can mute yourself unless you have a question you would like to ask, I'd appreciate that.
So I think just to kind of summarize what Ann said, and we'll get into more of the specifics around the policy next, the whole purpose of credit flexibility is really to provide options that exist beyond solely seat time for students and really give them an opportunity to customize their education. So that can be done in a variety of ways, and you all know, especially your students that you're working with sometimes need pushed to be thinking differently. So you as adults can also help, spur imagination when it comes to using credit flexibility as a tool in their toolbox. So it just provides students a flexible, personalized way to gain credits, and it also provides equitable access to various courses because you can leverage like other school opportunities through credit flexibility to allow students to have coursework that maybe your school district doesn't necessarily offer at your school. So into the policy requirements, number one, districts must have a credit flexibility policy adopted by your Board of Education or governing body. So this means that if you're not familiar with your district's credit flex policy, your board is the first stop to find out a little bit more about it. And when making decisions about some of the options that we're going to present to you, such as testing out, making sure that your board is well informed and also is a part of the decision-making process will be really important. The policy must place no limits on the courses or number of courses or credits earned. It must establish a procedure and a timeline that is flexible to accommodate unpredicted opportunities and does not discourage the use of credit flexibility for students. But that it also needs to establish an appeal process. So if for some reason your school or high school building decides that that particular student's credit flex plan is not able to be approved, there needs to be a appeals process at your district level for a parent and student to access in order to appeal that decision.
And the one last thing to add to that is the fact that no student who chooses to utilize credit flexibility is to suffer negative consequences for having done so. That doesn't affect your students as much as it does students in regular high schools where they suddenly are being punished for, oh, well, these grades can't count toward their GPA and they can't count toward this and they can't, those are, that's what an example of a negative consequence would be.
And feel free to jump in with any questions specifically around these policy requirements. If you'd like, just unmute yourself and feel free to jump in. The other, thing that the law requires is clear communication annually to all students in the district. So at some point for all the students in your district, grades 7 through 12, it has to be communicated that credit flexibility is an option for them and where to find how to apply for that credit flex. The policy must also be placed on the school district's website. So again, if you're unfamiliar with your district's credit flex policy, I would definitely be getting with administrators or with school board members to locate that and ensure that it is on the district's website. So to give some more specific examples of how this can look in a school district, we've kind of created an infographic and split it up for your presentation here. But work-based learning is a primary way that credit flexibility can be used in delivering content so that a student is ready to demonstrate what they've learned. So that's what we're going to spend some time on for the rest of our webinar. Are there any specific questions on anything we've covered up until this point, maybe about the policy or the requirements to communicate? Great. So let's dig in and see how we can leverage this in a variety of ways around work. So many of your
I'm
students.
sorry.
Oh, no, please go ahead.
Karen Taylor with Schnee Learning Center. I just have a question about the teachers of record. I know that you said that a teacher, a certified teacher and highly qualified whatever must grade or assess the plan or the performance. Is a district able to require that teacher is their teacher, or does a student have a right to have another teacher do that?
It has to be agreed upon who the expert is, but the school itself is the one responsible for making sure that correct licensure and or expertise is being used. So that's an area that the school would have the ultimate decision about.
And correct me if I'm wrong. I think where you really want to pay attention to that very specifically is in the courses that are required for graduation.
Absolutely.
Because there's also an option, and I'm specifically talking about in EMIS, for example, there's an option for you to declare a teacher of record as an outside contractor.
Right.
Through credit flexibility.
Yes.
So, and I can send this link out to you later through Sheila. I have an example of a student who works in optometrist's office, and you could list the optometrist as the outside contractor to verify the optometry credit.
And that can happen all the time. But at the same time, it's still the school or the district's responsibility to say, yes, this person has the expertise that no one here would have. Doesn't mean that you can't have somebody there that would have the expertise, but the best expertise, or we are going to accept the expertise of this person in declaring whether or not the student is demonstrating the learning. It's totally fine.
Thank you.
And it can
very
be,
helpful.
pardon me?
Very helpful, she said.
I said thank you. That is very helpful.
Oh, good. Okay.
Awesome. So with that in mind, because that's an important point for what we're going to talk about with work-based learning, because essentially what does happen, especially when you're talking about elective credits or some technical course credits, what often happens is you may not have a properly licensed teacher in your building to verify that specific set of competencies, which is where you would place the employer or the supervisor as the teacher of record in that case, because they have the content expertise to verify the learning. What that doesn't exclude, though, is that there does continue to have to be a point of contact at the school district to help monitor the student's experience in terms of making sure that the student is meeting the requirements set forth in the agreement, in terms of making sure that the employer is properly communicating with the student. So just because a credit flex plan may declare someone else as the teacher of record does not mean that the school district shouldn't also have a point of contact on that project. So we'll get started on that.
Someone needs to be managing the plan.
Yes.
As well as assisting and supporting the student to make sure that they're achieving and making progress.
Yep. So last year, actually, might have been 2 years ago now. It's crazy how time flies,
yes,
huh? The department was legislated to provide guidance to districts on how exactly schools can issue credit for work experiences. And credit flexibility is the framework in which districts can award credit for work. And so many of your students, if not the majority of your students, probably have part-time jobs as it is, right? If not, full-time jobs that they're working in addition to recovering credits and things. So as we go through this, think about the creative ways that you can leverage the part-time jobs that your students are already holding to maybe give them some credits or beef up their work-based learning experience in a variety of ways. Number one, especially if they're the class of 2020, they can use 120 hours of work experience toward their graduation pathway. Also, if there's an opportunity for a student to earn an industry-recognized credential at work. So, for example, if they're in fast food, for example, Serve Safe is a credential that's on the graduation list that would relate well to a work experience that perhaps an employer could help. So there's lots of ways that a work experience could help qualify a student toward graduation, including strictly course credits, but not only course credits. So this framework is on the department's website, but basically all it does is outline that credit flexibility is the mechanism for which school districts can use to award credit for work-based learning.
Yeah.
So on this slide, and hopefully it's hyperlinked for you so you could click it right now, takes you to a work-based learning toolkit that the Department of Education has published. And there's 3 voices that are captured in this toolkit. So when you click this link, you'll go to a landing page where it is, one is tailored more towards business partners, one is tailored more towards parents and students, and one is tailored more towards educators. I would encourage you to use the educators one. On that toolkit are a variety of forms and documents to help you establish a work-based learning program, because in order for a work experience to count for credit flex, you have to have thought through what competencies and what standards the student is going to be demonstrating the learning of within the work experience. So yesterday at your convocation, I almost said convening. Okay, at your convocation, you received a student success plan, kind of comprehensive document. So if you have that in front of you, I'd like to reference it for you, because what Sheila and her team have done for you is taken the learning agreement that shows up on this work-based learning toolkit and condensed it in a way so that you could just use that agreement as a student's credit flexibility plan. So I'd like to reference with you at this time, and I don't think the pages are, oh, they are numbered, look at that. I'd like to walk through with you pages, well, it's in the back of your packet, and it starts at page 2. And if you don't have it in front of you right at this time, that should be fine, and you'll understand once you get a hold of it. But the application for pursuing educational options, parentheses, credit flexibility, is kind of what I want to reference, because the key to this is making sure that all parties that we keep mentioning, the school district, the student, and the parent or guardian, and the employer, all have a very clear understanding of what skills or knowledge the student is supposed to be gaining as a result of their work placement. And so we can keep using the fast food example. But there's also a lot of business operations that can happen at a fast food site. So when you're developing a credit flex plan or a work-based learning agreement, depending on what terms you want to use, really lifting out what those exact examples are of how to push up the quality of that work experience so that the student is learning something, and building out those competencies and standards through this plan are very important. And on your document, that starts on page 3. And what you'll find is that you can use Ohio's academic learning standards to build a credit flex or work-based learning agreement. You can use career technical education competencies to build these plans out. You can even use Ohio Means Jobs Readiness Seal competencies to build out this learning agreement. So once you have identified what the skills are, what the standards are that you want the student to be accomplishing on the work site, then it's just talking about what the activities are that the student is going to do in order to be ready to show that they're competent in those areas. So for example, if you choose like a business operations competency and you want the student to be able to run a cash register, right, because that's in the standards, then the employer just needs to know that you want them to put the kid on the cash register every now and then. So as long as the learning agreement is the foundation of everybody goes to this one place to manage the experience, that way everybody's on the same page. And when the student earns the credit, so if I'm talking about business operations standards, the class that's going to show up on the kid's transcript for me is business operations, not necessarily work experience, because for a really long time on students' transcripts, it shows up as 3 credits of work experience. But if you use credit flexibility, then it can be a more tailored credit to what the student is actually doing and be reflective of the experience that they had. So now your student is a little more marketable because on their transcript, they have some experience in business operations. So think about that as you're fleshing out these learning agreements. And if for whatever reason there's a skill or a standard that the work site just cannot accommodate, there's no reason why the student couldn't get that knowledge from somewhere else. So one resource that comes to mind that you could plug a student into is lynda.com, lynda.com. That's a series of virtual learning experiences, and many of you are experts in virtual learning, on technical subject matters. So for example, lynda.com has a project management course. So if you wanted the student to get fluent in project management, for example, you could plug them into that course, build that right into their learning agreement, and that's how they obtain the knowledge to demonstrate the competency, not necessarily the work site. So that was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. So I do have a YouTube video link that I'll give to Sheila to send out to you that kind of goes through an optometry example of this, on how you can build out this learning agreement to be reflective of the actual job experience and articulate the standards that they're addressing.
Okay, awesome. And this is also a good time, Cassie, would it be great for the schools to reach out to the businesses in their communities?
Absolutely. We just talked a little bit about a lot of your students are already employed. And so sometimes what's daunting for schools is thinking about, how do I build all these business partnerships and place my students in internship experiences, but they also have to work full-time or part-time, right? So thinking about how to leverage the partners that your student has already started a relationship for you, I think is really important. So if your student is working down the road at the grocery store, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I'd love to come see what you're doing sometime. Maybe you can introduce me to your supervisor, right? So that they're also helping you create or generate these business partnerships. But you all know these students so well that you could also see if they just need a better job, right? And that's when your own business partnerships could really be of use. If you know you have a student that is interested in any kind of engineering, right? And you develop a business partnership with a local manufacturer, right? Getting them to see an actual facility is huge and could really lift them out of poverty that they might be in. So yes, your business partners want to help with this, and sometimes all it takes is a phone call and say, no, we want to help co-supervise the student at your work site, and that will help them be less nervous about employing youth under the age of 18, but you also serve over 18 kids. So,
And family businesses also work.
yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, I've worked with a number of parents of special needs students whose transition plan is to come into the family business and work. And there's no reason that students can't be earning credit from that situation too.
Absolutely. And it's just really taking a look at the experience and what the student's actually doing and matching it to our education standards lingo and building out a plan from that. And then filling in the gaps, right? Because it's unlikely that one job experience is going to equal an English language arts class, for example.
Exactly.
But there's ways that the school district could fill in the gaps and allow that work experience to demonstrate.
That leads to one thing that's really important. We are not talking about replacing specific courses necessarily. It can be, but it can also be aspects of a content area or a course that are put together to create an opportunity that students earn credit toward English language arts or within citizenship and working in the voting system or things like that would earn social studies credit, but are not necessarily the requirements one for one out of a course that they would take in your curriculum.
Yeah, that's a great point. And often I get questions about, well, how much credit would you award for this one job experience? And I think you have to really ask yourself that based on the learning agreement or the credit flexibility plan, because if the student is really only learning like 2 standards or 2 skills, that might only be a quarter credit. Right. And that's okay. And you get to decide that. however
Right.
much credit you want to award for that specific experience.
And sometimes the success at some of these things will then build for them to want to work harder on something else.
So at this time, I'd like to answer any questions you might have about how to leverage credit flexibility to award credit for job experience. So specifically, how to leverage credit flexibility to award credit for job experience. We're then going to go through just a few more examples of how you could leverage credit flex. Any questions on credit flexing work?
Well, in looking, this is Trina Moore with Summit Academy. In looking at the toolkit that was provided at our training, is that what is anticipated to use for the ODE sponsor schools? Like if we already had a template we were using, is that okay? Or would you like us to move to this format?
So Trina, and work with Lori to make sure, we just put this together to make sure it hit everything. So look at your format and the forms that you're using. Our biggest concern is your sponsor, because we want to make sure that you guys are always in compliance. When the auditor of state comes out, they're going to be looking to make sure that these are properly filled out and completely filled out. Since that's a new area that our dear friends across the street love to look at when they come out and audit you yearly. So Trina, look through yours and see if you've got any gaps in your forms. You may want to go ahead and switch to this form or just add to your current form. So we did this as a sample that gives it a one-stop shop for a lot of our schools that are just starting with this. But we want to make sure you hit all these items, because the last thing I need is, or you need really, the auditor when they come in, next year and look back at this year when you can't change anything.
And I would say one thing that is commonly absent from most standard work agreements is the learning objectives section. That's something that seems to be somewhat new to fleshing out. So if your current forms only have like release of liability, what hours are the student working, and there's no reference to what are the learning outcomes, I would absolutely make sure that those are present if you're going to use that agreement for credit
I
flexibility.
mean, that's an absolute. For credit flexibility, if nothing else, you have to have what it is that they're learning, how they're demonstrating it, and the criteria for which they need to meet in order to earn the credit to say that they have demonstrated that learning. Otherwise, it's not a credit flex plan.
Great question. Yep,
Thank
great
you.
question.
Well, we'll probably just adopt what you have. Thank you for your
Thank you, Trina.
That was a lot. Thank you.
Any other questions about leveraging credit flexibility for work experiences?
Hi, Cassie. This is Lori. I have a question for you, please.
Hi, Miss Lori.
I think that it's very daunting sometimes for the schools to look at the learning standards, look at the skill set that the student may be performing or trying to learn or display in their work site, and putting those two things together. So how would you suggest we best go about doing that? Do you have any examples, or like here, like the cash register, refer to this learning standard? I don't know, ordering supplies, or doing any type of reading and comprehending the staff handbook and teaching that to another employee. Do you have any ways that they could do that so it's not so daunting to look at the standards and try to connect it to the work experience and that skill set?
So I think the first thing is to become somewhat, at least, familiar with the various career fields of the career technical education standards, because then you can start to drill down from there. So there's technically 15 career fields that the career technical standards are organized within. And so like the cash register example, you can kind of discern that that's a more business oriented standard there. So then you could start with the business career field standards. And what's good about the standards per career field, each document is in a PDF, so you can just like Control F to find keywords. So if you get to the place where you can download the business standards, for example, you can download that PDF, Control F, cash register, or the magic of searching, cash, so it's nice and short and you can pull up whatever you want. So if you can get the 15 career field standards documents, because I would assume many of you are already familiar with the academic learning standards. I would just naturally think that the career tech ones would be a little more foreign. So if you can get those 15 PDFs downloaded and have any kind of a sense of where that content would live to start from, that would be my first recommended step. And
That's
15 is still a lot, I realize. So I apologize for that. But it's a good first step. And those technical competencies, the homepage of where you find those, are linked in your page 3, it looks like, of your comprehensive document. So we tried to link them so they were easier to find. And again, those ones are only really necessary if you're trying to credit flex a more career-oriented class, because your other option then is to align these work experiences with the Ohio Means Jobs Readiness Seal competencies, and you could credit flex a more employability skills type of class.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful.
I will tell you about a tool that's coming, and I'm hesitating telling you this because I know what it's like when the Department of Education is like, hey, this thing's coming. But we are developing a tool called the Standards by Design tool that will allow educators to go in and find alignments between career technical standards and academic standards.
Some year it'll come.
It's scheduled for release in December, which is positive, and I do think that that's pretty firm because I have a grant deadline I have to report that. But when it comes, what we can do is send it out to you, because what you can do is search standards by keyword.
Yeah.
So then you could search cashier in this one portal, and it'll populate for you the career tech standards that would have the word cashier in it, and the math standards that might align.
Connected.
Yes. So
Because
there's a tool coming that will
We
be more
actually
helpful,
worked across departments in order to do this alignment.
which is exciting.
Yes.
And we will have a tool, and we will
Yeah.
roll it out to you. But in the meantime, those 15 PDFs will be a great starting
But
point.
the sad news is that no, there is no one fast way to do everything. There has to be some legwork. But one of the ways I would suggest too is if you meet and talk to the business supervisor, you can have that discussion of the kinds of tasks and expectations for the work, and those could give you keywords then to plug in to find.
Okay, and we have a question that was typed in. How does Credit Flex work in terms of counting as school hours for attendance and ultimately helping with FTE funding? So, Jacqueline, so I'm going to first ask, so for the online schools, if you're with our eSchool, or one of our blended learning schools, so for the online time for Credit Flex, the FTE manual identifies it. It is 120 hours equals 1 credit. So you'd have to kind of, and I work with you on that piece if you're the eSchool. I know I've talked to our eSchool people about that a little bit, but I will pass that out for the others on the brick and mortar way to do this.
If you're a brick and mortar school, credit flexibility hours, the hours itself of contact aren't of importance. It's the amount of credit that is being earned. So for the little bit of difference for you is the FTE funding, but for a school district getting funding for a student, when a student has the 5 full credits over the course of an entire school year, the student then qualifies as a fully funded student for FTE funding. And that is handled just by the credit that's being awarded in the plan. What is intended to be, not whether or not the kid does it, because we never know whether a student's going to pass the course or not.
So
Are there,
yeah.
what little differences are there
So-
when they're a community school or?
So for the brick and mortar community schools, it's going to be looked at how many credits you're awarding for the students. So just same thing with the high schools. If you're awarding, if it's competency-based credits, it would just be how many credits you're earning for that competency. If you're doing the standard 5 courses a day, like a traditional high school is run, then it's going to look very similarly. Are you awarding a full credit for this item, or is this only going to be a half a credit? So it's going to really depend on how you write it, but funding-wise, it's going to base on the credit that you give. And Cassie and Ann, is there any baseline that you determine this is worth a half credit, this is worth a full credit?
That is totally a local control situation. And the thing to understand is there are 2 aspects here for brick and mortar schools. For the most part, the student does not have to have 5 credit hours all the time during the full year. They can be taking 3 credits the first semester and 2 credits the second semester, and it's 5 over the course of the year, and they're fine. However, if the student happens to be an athlete, then Ohio High Schools comes in and says they have to have 5 hours of credit being taken the quarter before they're going to be active in their sport. So if that should be an issue for you in any way, that just needs to be a consideration to think of.
So it looks like it's a lot of local control. So when you do your credit flex plan,
Just be careful.
Be careful in how you write it and what standards you're having, and will the standards that you think that the student's going to meet would be equivalent to a half a credit or a full credit or a quarter credit.
Okay, so suppose, and many of you have, students who are trying to recover credit from courses that they were not successful in. And so say you identify the areas of learning that the student needs to demonstrate competence in, and you identify them on this credit flex plan. However, at the end of the credit flex plan, those are the deficiencies from the course. They're going to be awarded the full credit for the course, even though that learning doesn't demonstrate a full credit of learning. Does that make sense? So they're adding to the learning that they previously had, and they're developing their competencies in that area. But the result is you will get your full credit for having taken that course by completing this credit flex plan.
So, Ann, let me ask you, so we have several dropout prevention recovery schools. So let's say the student is now coming in and they should be a senior, but they only have 2 credits or 3 credits.
Right.
Because they earned failing grades in the other credits.
Correct.
So could they then, the school, by adding on these few competencies, recover that full credit that they received in F? And so freshman English, if they did a few things, they could get that full freshman English?
What we say is you need to know what your curriculum says that a freshman English course should be about. You would know what of that curriculum does the student already know? What are their weaknesses or where are their deficiencies? So you put the deficiencies in the plan, and then you award the full credit. So they recover the full credit.
That does lead into our kind of finale point of that, because the other thing we wanted to make sure you knew were the different other ways that a student could gain experience to credit flex. So to the point about filling in a deficiency, there's lots of ways that a student could gain the knowledge to fill their deficiencies. And one of them is distance learning, which many of you are, e-schools or use online platforms all the time. Yep, blended. So you could see how that could fill in gaps. And Anne had alluded to one earlier about, foreign language at home. That's an experience that you could use to provide the student the right amount of learning to catch up, if you will. But also community service activities, if there are other athletics that they're doing outside of school, if there's a musical experience that they're taking part of outside of school, any of these experiential learning opportunities that students are having outside of school could also be used to fill out a credit flex plan to fill those in.
Yep, definitely.
So with the distance learning, is this something that a traditional school, so let's say we have a brick and mortar school, and there's a student who would like to take, let's say it's Japanese language. I
Yeah.
know that's a weird example
No, great
for a
example.
lot of our schools, but the school doesn't offer it.
Right.
But they can get it online
Yep.
through whatever, an agreement with a local community college. Could that be part of
Absolutely.
Okay, so then the
Any
student.
online course
Mhm.
that the school determines is worthy, yes,
Yep.
can be used, and they can agree to use the evaluation or the assessment from the course
From that
itself,
course.
or they can say, but you also need to do
Are locally defined.
yes, a project, a presentation, whatever that they locally define as something that's needed also.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this could also be if the family takes a trip to Washington, D.C.
Absolutely,
Awesome.
Yeah.
yes.
So we like to make sure that people know that there's lots of different ways that you could fill this plan out or the student provide their own learning essentially for these. And, courses offered in other schools is another opportunity. You mentioned like taking a college class. And what's interesting is, College Credit Plus has allowed for there to be a lot more flexibility in that, but it's not always the case, right? So if the college offers a night class, for example, that's not a formal College Credit Plus class, and the student goes and takes an evening class, you could use that as the premise for a credit flexibility plan. And something that is often a hot topic is test out provisions.
Yes.
So students are allowed to indicate that they would prefer to test out of a credit versus having to take the entire class to demonstrate competency. So that's a tool that's in your toolbox as well to think about. Is there anything more you want to mention about test out?
Just to add to the point that oftentimes we have students who end up in credit recovery because they're not hoop jumpers.
Mhm.
They don't like
Yeah.
to do all the crap that they're asked, that's their word, that they're asked to do in school, yet they're very competent in the subject. And so testing out is a perfect option. Or testing out is also an option for students who've been very mobile and haven't stayed in one location long enough to earn credits for it. So you can have your own prescribed assessments that you are used to test out of certain courses, but the state tests in high school courses may also be used to determine whether or not a student earns credit, and a student earning a 3, 4, or 5 is permitted to be allowed by a school or a district to be awarded credit. It's a local decision, course by course, test by test, as to what performance level is allowable for the credit to be earned. But for the most part, the state tests, a person who scores it proficient is adequately proficient in order to earn the credit and not have to take the course.
Oh, great. So for a lot of our high schools,
Yes.
if you know that you've got a great student in whether it's English, there's
English,
biology,
math, science,
there's math
and social
1.
studies.
Yep, any of those topics, great way to get those kids some of their credits in.
Right.
And I think I heard somebody may have a question.
It's Trina again from Summit. My question was just on the test out. Is that available for all year, or does the test out cut off at a certain, does it cut off in September?
No, a student can test out anytime there's a testing window for the state tests, and you can determine if there are certain tests that you give at certain times, whether there are certain windows for those kinds of testing, or actually it can be at any time if it's the kind of test that can be taken at any time.
What would you recommend for a school that's inheriting a student that maybe has a 4, but they didn't actually have a credit flex plan with their new school?
They don't have to have a credit flex plan. When a district or school is welcoming a new student into their curriculum, it's the district or school's responsibility to determine how that student's previous curriculum matches your curriculum. And if the student in their experiences has satisfied your courses, you award credit for those courses, whether they exist on the transcript now or not. That's just a a typical but sometimes not always understood reason. And one of the reasons that has come about is because of the federal legislation with homelessness and students, and because Ohio awards credits based on demonstration of learning. So in other words, the amount of credit in a brick and mortar school is determined by the time in which a course is scheduled, but the earning of the credit is based upon whether or not the student demonstrated the learning. Therefore, when a student moves from school to school to school, they have no chance of earning credit unless they come into a district that awards credit by semester, by 9 weeks, or whatever. And so that's one of the way Ohio is satisfying the federal mandate of making sure that students get credit for time spent in coursework. That's how we do it, is by saying that you need to be awarding credit for curriculum that is earned prior to being in your school, regardless of whether or not there's a transcripted grade for it. If you're part of receiving the student into your curriculum is saying they have satisfied this learning by these things, that then gets entered on their transcript and the credit goes on. You just need to be careful that it doesn't suddenly show up that you're awarding a lot of credits without having some kind of a justification. I would recommend putting in the student's record documentation of why that decision was made. It's just because, once again, too many times the people who make those decisions aren't there later on to substantiate, and then somebody doesn't know why and they start questioning, and then who loses out? The student.
Right. I think we've gone over our time.
Yep, that is fine.
But we want to make sure you have any of your questions answered, and thank you again for giving us this time.
Yes.
Feel free to email Sheila, and she'll
Yep.
get in contact with us if you have more specific questions. I emailed you the YouTube link of the optometry example of setting up the learning agreement. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Cassie.
it's
Thank
fun.
you, Ann. Like always, schools, if you have any questions at any time, let me know, let your consultants know. We will get you the answers. We want you all to be successful, and I really do think that this credit flexibility will be huge for you and your students, and it will be really helpful to ensuring success of our kids. Thank you.